His sacrifice was for all mankind, and that for all our ills and all the things in our fallen nature. It was a redemption.
Imagine for a moment that everything you've ever pictured about Jesus was only a fragment, an echo shaped by centuries of art, tradition, and repetition. Not necessarily false, but incomplete. The soft features, the calm expression, the familiar robe. These images feel ancient, almost sacred in their familiarity. But what if those images are not the earliest ones? What if, buried in remote places and preserved by communities far removed from the centers of power, there exists a vision so vast, so intense, that it completely reshapes how we understand Christ? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't just a forgotten detail of history. It's a doorway into a version of Christianity that most of the world has never encountered. A version that doesn't just comfort you, but confronts you with something immense, in something almost beyond comprehension. For generations, people have been taught that the Bible, as they know it, is complete. Depending on tradition, that might mean 66 books or 73. But the message is usually the same. This is the full story, nothing significant left out. Yet far from Europe, in the ancient highlands of Ethiopia, there exists a Christian tradition that quietly preserved a much larger collection of sacred writings. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church maintains a canon that includes dozens of additional texts written in Ge'ez, one of the oldest liturgical languages still in use. These writings were not hidden in secret vaults or recently discovered. They have been continuously read, copied, and revered for centuries by a community whose roots stretch back to the early 4th century, out to the time of King Ezana of the Aksumite Empire. What makes this tradition so striking is not just the number of books it preserves, but what those books contain. Among them are works like the Book of Enoch and the Ascension of Isaiah, texts that were known to early Jewish and Christian communities, referenced in ancient writings, and yet later excluded from the canons adopted across much of the world. These are not casual additions or later inventions. They are deeply rooted in the intellectual and spiritual environment from which Christianity itself emerged. They offer visions of reality that are far more expansive, more layered, and at times more unsettling than what many people are accustomed to hearing. In these writings, Christ is not introduced gently. He is not first presented as a comforting figure meant to ease your worries. Instead, he appears as something overwhelming, radiant, powerful, and impossible to ignore. Descriptions speak of brilliance that outshines anything human language can easily capture, of a presence so intense that even heavenly beings react with awe. This is a portrayal that emphasizes not just compassion, but cosmic authority. It suggests a being who is not merely part of history, but the very force through which existence itself is sustained. This perspective shifts the emotional experience of faith. Instead of beginning with familiarity, it begins with awe. Instead of approaching something immediately relatable, you are first confronted with something vast and almost unapproachable. Only after that recognition does the idea of closeness, of relationship, begin to make sense. It's a reversal of the order many people are used to, and it changes everything about how the story feels. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Book of Enoch is how it describes a figure known as the Son of Man. Long before the New Testament texts were written, this figure is portrayed as pre-existing, enthroned, and central to the final judgment of humanity. The imagery is vivid, a being associated with light, fire, and authority, surrounded by celestial forces. When you later encounter similar descriptions in the Book of Revelation, the parallels are difficult to ignore. The language, the symbolism, even specific details seem to echo across centuries. What makes this even more intriguing is that the New Testament itself contains direct references to Enoch. The Epistle of Jude includes a passage that closely mirrors a prophecy found in Enoch's writings. This indicates that at least some early Christian authors were not only aware of these texts, but considered them meaningful, even authoritative. That raises an obvious question. If these writings were part of the intellectual and spiritual world of early Christianity, why were they later set aside? The answer lies partly in history, specifically in the period when Christianity transitioned from a marginalized movement into an institution closely tied to political power. After the conversion of Constantine the Great, in the 4th century, Christianity began to unify under imperial influence. Councils were held, doctrines were clarified, and decisions were made about which texts would be considered official. And the Council of Laodicea and later writings, like the Festal Letter of Athanasius of Alexandria, helped establish a more defined canon. In that process, complexity was often reduced. Texts that presented highly symbolic cosmologies, layered heavens, or unconventional narratives were increasingly viewed as problematic. They were harder to standardize, harder to control, and more open to interpretation. In a growing empire that needed cohesion, a streamlined set of scriptures made practical sense. Over time, many of these other writings faded from widespread use, not necessarily because they were forgotten entirely, but because they were no longer copied, taught, or included in official doctrine. But Ethiopia followed a different path. Geographically and politically separated from the centers where these decisions were being made, its Christian communities continued their traditions largely uninterrupted. Monks in remote monasteries painstakingly copied manuscripts by hand, preserving not only the texts that became widely accepted elsewhere, but also those that did not. Their work required immense dedication, long hours, difficult conditions, and a level of commitment that is hard to imagine today. Yet because of that effort, a broader picture of early Christian thought survived. The Ascension of Isaiah provides another remarkable perspective. It describes a journey through multiple layers of heaven, each more radiant and complex than the last. As the narrative unfolds, it presents a vision of Christ descending through these realms, gradually concealing his true nature at each level. By the time he reaches the physical world, his identity is hidden from almost all observers. It's a dramatic, almost cinematic portrayal, one that emphasizes both the magnitude of the divine and the depth of the incarnation. This kind of storytelling expands the scope of the narrative far beyond a single moment in history. It places the life of Jesus within a much larger cosmic framework, one that includes unseen dimensions, hierarchies of beings, and a reality that extends far beyond human perception. Whether one interprets it literally, symbolically, or somewhere in between, it undeniably adds a new layer of depth to the story. In modern times, interest in these ideas has begun to re-emerge, not only among scholars, but also in popular culture. Filmmaker Mel Gibson, known for directing The Passion of the Christ, has spoken about exploring more expansive and unconventional elements in his upcoming project, The Resurrection of the Christ. Based on his descriptions, the film may delve into themes that echo some of these ancient writings: cosmic Sangharsh, spiritual realms, and events that unfold beyond the visible world. If that vision is realized, it could introduce a much wider audience to ideas that have remained largely outside mainstream awareness, not as definitive answers, but as possibilities. alternate ways of understanding a story that continues to shape billions of lives. What all of this ultimately reveals is not a simple hidden truth waiting to replace everything else, but a much richer and more complex landscape than many people realize. Christianity, like any long-lived tradition, has evolved through history, shaped by culture, politics, and human decision-making. The version most people encounter today is one expression of that history, but it is not the only one that has ever existed. And perhaps that is the most important takeaway. The story of Jesus is not smaller than we thought. It is larger. It stretches across languages, continents, and centuries, carried by communities who preserved what they believed mattered most. Some emphasized clarity and unity, others preserved mystery and depth. Together, they form a tapestry that is far more intricate than any single version alone. So when you think about Jesus now, you might still see the familiar image, but behind it, there may be something else, something brighter, something older, something that invites not just comfort, but wonder.